Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday. It's May 15th, 2025. Today is day 587. This is Thursday, so it's a weekly summary. There's lots of news to share today. I did not do the live briefing today. Nehemiah King on our team did that on my behalf this morning because we're still at this strategy meeting in North Carolina. Lots of updates from the Middle East. We have staff in New York City right now who are a part of the mid-May Nakba commemorations at the United Nations. And one of them texted me today and they said, I'll just read it to you. They said, the news is just so discouraging. They said this, it's depressing. Everyone is saying it's genocide. They're just saying how bad the situation is. Everyone is pinning their hopes on the upcoming June Saudi-France assembly that will concern itself with the two-state solution. But it's good to be here, representing Churches for Middle East Peace and connecting well with other Christian groups who are committed to peace. So, there are so many people who are working on this issue who are so discouraged and feel like there's no good news in sight. But let's continue to not give up hope. Let's continue to pay attention to what's happening, to seek to be faithful with that which is before us. In terms of what's happening in Gaza, again, on this 587th day, a week ago, most of Gaza's 170 aid kitchens or community kitchens shut their doors. This was hours after the World Central Kitchen Charity announced that it had run out of supplies necessary to provide meals in the territory. 1 in 5 people in Gaza are facing starvation. This is with the entire population, quote, facing high levels of acute food insecurity, end quote, which is projected to worsen in coming months. That's according to a report that was released by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Initiative. The report also estimates that Israeli authorities' plan for delivering aid is highly insufficient to meet the population's essential needs. The health ministry warned yesterday that 90% of residents in the Strip are suffering from water insecurity, and more than a quarter of the water samples are now contaminated. The ministry said that the contamination is contributing to the spread of disease. Nearly all of Gaza's desalination plants are out of service. Hospital patients in Gaza are surviving on 1 meal a day, with poor nutrition and medicine shortages slowing down the recovery of those who've been burned or injured as a result of airstrikes. This is according to Palestinian medics and the medical coordinator in Gaza and the occupied West Bank Doctors Without Borders. Some Israeli military officials monitoring humanitarian conditions in Gaza have privately concluded that Palestinians in the enclave are facing widespread starvation unless aid deliveries are restored within weeks. This is actually according to Israeli defense sources. The officers have warned their commanders that immediate steps are needed to prevent starvation. Israeli government officials have to date maintained that the blockage of aid has not posed a major threat to civilians in Gaza, while NGOs and so many others, experts, have come to a very, very different conclusion. Yesterday, the report from the health ministry in Gaza said that over 70 Palestinians were killed and 125 people were wounded in airstrikes since Wednesday morning. The death toll since October 7th at that time was 52,928 people, with close to 120,000 people injured. Again, those numbers are believed to be largely underestimating the actual totals. And today, Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 94 people across Gaza. That was yesterday and today. That's the Civil Defense Agency reporting those numbers. The majority of casualties were reported in the south in Khan Yunis, according to the spokesperson. Israel is working on a series of sites in Gaza that could potentially serve as aid distribution centers. This is a part of that U.S.-Israel plan. BBC News reported that they have reviewed satellite imagery and come to that conclusion. And French President Macron said what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza is shameful and that the Europeans should consider more sanctions. I thought this was very, very interesting. And I really want those who question or think that Churches for Middle East Peace is too supportive of the Palestinians Listen to this update. This is coming out of the UK. The longest serving member of the British Parliament's House of Commons. He's a Conservative member of Parliament. His name is Sir Edward Lee, Leigh, Lee. He commented on Israel's actions in Gaza. He said this is a quote: "I have been a member of the Conservative Friends of Israel for over 40 years. And Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization that hides its own fighters inside hospitals. But frankly, it is unacceptable to recklessly bomb a hospital. It is unacceptable to starve an entire people." And the member of parliament, Sir Edward Leigh, continued and said, "When is genocide not genocide?" Now, that is from someone who self-identifies as a conservative, as a friend of Israel for more than 40 years, saying what's happening in Gaza is wrong. Not only that, when is genocide not genocide? An Israeli bombardment of the European hospital in Khan Yunis killed 28 people and injured dozens. That happened on Tuesday. The Israeli military said that was a precision strike. They said that Hamas had a command and control center there. They claimed it was beneath the hospital. The strike, what was important about that is that it was targeting the de facto leader of Hamas, Mohammed Sinwar, who is the brother of the former head of the military wing of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. 3 rockets were fired at South Israel, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility over those rocket attacks on the border communities in Gaza this week. And the U.S.-backed aid group, there's a new aid group that is going to start work in Gaza that's supposed to start by the end of the month. It's being heavily criticized. The plan is being heavily criticized. So no humanitarian assistance, no food, no water, no humanitarian assistance has been allowed into Gaza since March 2nd. There's a global hunger monitor. They've warned that 500,000 people are facing starvation, a quarter of the population in the enclave, where Israel, and the Palestinian militant group Hamas have been at war since October 2023. Israel is accusing Hamas of misdirecting and stealing aid. Hamas says that is not happening. So there's this blockade on the entire population of the Gaza Strip until Hamas releases all remaining hostages. Now, Israel says it's backing the American humanitarian plan and the newly created organization. It's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's going to run the distribution of aid. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a U.S. security firm, UG Solutions, and U.S.-based Safe Reach Solutions, which does logistics and planning, will be involved. And at distribution sites, humanitarian assistance would be given to aid groups that would then give it to civilians. The U.S. Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation yesterday said it has reached agreements with Israel to begin operations in the enclave before the end of the month. They suggested that Israel had agreed to allow aid into Gaza as the foundation is now setting up its operations. The U.S.-Israeli plan to funnel humanitarian aid into parts of Gaza will initially only feed about 60% of the population of the Gaza Strip. That's according to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. He said that on Friday. And in terms of ceasefire negotiations, one of the most significant things that happened this week was the last living American hostage, Aidan Alexander. We've been talking about him a lot. He was released on Monday by Hamas. According to the U.S., Palestinian, and Israeli sources, he was released, and that was facilitated by back-channel conversations in which a Hamas official approached a pro-Trump activist, Bashara Baba, who served as an intermediary between U.S. and Hamas. The family of the hostage, Aidan Alexander, have given thanks to President Trump. They've called for new negotiations so that more hostages might be freed and the war might be brought to an end. May it be so. Qatar says that Israel's recent attacks in Gaza show that they're not interested in negotiating a ceasefire. The Qatari prime minister has said that a U.S.-backed humanitarian aid distribution plan for Gaza is unnecessary and stresses that the UN should be allowed to deliver aid to the war-torn enclave. And more than 65 survivors of Hamas activity have sent a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu and to other members of the government, urging them to seize what they call a genuine opportunity for a breakthrough in negotiations and to urge and secure the release of all hostages that are held in Gaza as a part of a broader regional diplomatic effort. And Israeli officials said that Netanyahu has spoken several times in the past days with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Trump envoy, but Israel remains committed to a proposal that will require Hamas to release 10 living hostages and half of the deceased bodies of captives before agreeing to negotiations. And that would be alongside of a 45-day ceasefire. In the occupied West Bank this week around midnight, last night leading into today, on the East Coast in the U.S., an Israeli woman who was critically wounded in a West Bank shooting yesterday died of her wounds. She was in a late term of her pregnancy. Haaretz reported that the woman and her husband were on their way to deliver the baby when the attack happened. The man was lightly wounded. It was not reported what happened to her unborn child. The Palestinian Authority earlier this week announced that it's lifting the ban on the Qatari-funded Al Jazeera news outlet in the West Bank after accusing the outlet of inciting sedition and interfering in internal Palestinian affairs earlier this year. And this past Sunday was the third anniversary of the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian-American journalist who was wearing a blue flak jacket that was clearly marked press when she was shot and killed by an Israeli soldier while covering an Israeli military operation in the city of Jenin. That was on May 11th in 2022. As of yet, even still, no one has been held accountable. At the time, Israeli military said in a statement that there was a high possibility that Miss Abu Akleh was accidentally hit by IDF gunfire towards suspects who were identified as armed Palestinian gunmen during an exchange of fire in which life-threatening, widespread, and indiscriminate shots were fired toward IDF soldiers. In Israel, I wanted to just give an update. I've been talking in the past couple of weeks about settler violence and settler extremism, and I mentioned an expression that's often cited in relationship to extremist settlers. It's the expression Kanane was right. This was a term that's been used in some of the attacks, particularly around the joint Memorial Day ceremony a couple of weeks ago. There were ceremonies put on by some of the human rights groups in Israel, like Combatants for Peace and Standing Together, who on Israeli Memorial Day hosted joint memorial ceremonies commemorating the deaths of Israelis, but also Palestinians who've lost their lives and been killed over the years. And I just wanted to take a minute and explain what that means. What that means is it's talking about a gentleman whose name was Meir Kahane. I don't know if gentleman's the right term. Meir Kahane was right. That's a slogan that's popular among extremist Jews who are a part of the fringe in Israel, but actually less of the fringe. They're a part of this movement that glorifies Rabbi Meir Kahane, and that would include like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are part of the Israeli government. And Kanane was a Jewish extremist who was among the first to popularize the idea of kicking all of the Arabs out of Israel, that there should not be any coexistence. Kahane was xenophobic. He had a logic of Jewish supremacy, and it's manifested itself in incredibly bloody ways over the years, including mobs attacking Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah. I think it's important to know, like, he is a Jewish extremist who has sowed seeds of militancy against Palestinians. Far-right Israeli government leaders, as I mentioned, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, follow in his footsteps, which is incredibly dangerous, not only for Palestinians, but also for Israelis, let alone for peace and stability in the region. An update on Iran. President Trump went to the Middle East on his first international trip during this presidency. And I talked this past week about how there have been unprecedented talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who have long been on the outs with one another. The Iranian and Saudi foreign ministers have discussed halting the erasure of Palestine. And the foreign ministers met in the Saudi city of Jeddah last week to discuss the two countries' bilateral relations and the ongoing genocide, direct quote, in the Gaza Strip. This is a result of the Israeli military offensive in the enclave. On Tuesday, President Trump addressed Iran's nuclear program, saying Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. The time is now. We don't have much time to wait. They must decide now. Wednesday, Trump told a meeting at the Gulf Cooperation Council he urgently wants to make a deal to wind down the Iran nuclear program that could ease economic sanctions, but that Tehran must end its support of proxy groups in the region as a condition for an agreement to be made. Iran promised the creation of a joint nuclear enrichment venture involving regional Arab countries and U.S. investments as an alternative to the U.S. demand for Tehran to dismantle its nuclear program. Witkoff's spokesperson yesterday denied that the proposal came up during last week's talks between Iran and the U.S. An official said that Iran would forego the highly enriched uranium for a deal to end U.S. sanctions. NBC reported that this week. Ali Khamenei said that Iran, this is the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said that Iran would commit to never making nuclear weapons, getting rid of stockpiles of highly enriched uranium, to agree to only enrich uranium at the lower levels that are needed for civilian use, and to allow international inspectors to supervise the process. Also related to Iran this week, Christians, Farsi-speaking Christians, Narges, Nasri, Abbas, Sori, Mehran, Shamlui, were informed on the 7th of May that their appeal was rejected and that they've had 5 days to turn themselves in to Evin prison to start serving their combined prison sentences of more than 40 years. In November of 2024, security forces conducted a series of raids that were on the homes of Christians in several cities across Iran. Narges, Abbas, and Mehran were among 13 people who were arrested as a part of this campaign to suppress Christians there. They appeared before a judge and they faced charges of membership of opposition groups, propaganda against the system, and propaganda activities contrary to Islamic law through foreign relations. In Yemen, Houthis have claimed that they fired a missile at the Ben Gurion airport, again warning airlines against flying to Israel. That happened earlier this week. And U.S. intelligence started picking up indications that the Houthi rebels were looking for an exit from a confrontation with the U.S. days before the ceasefire between the U.S. and the Houthis was announced. You'll recall that that agreement came at the exclusion of Israel, where the U.S. said they would stop bombing Yemen, and the Houthis said they would stop bombing U.S. and U.K. ships. In Syria, there was breaking news on Tuesday. President Trump announced the U.S. is removing all sanctions against Syria to give the country a chance at greatness. President Trump made remarks and delivered them in Saudi Arabia, stating this in front of Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman, where he received a standing ovation. And at the end, Trump mused, "Oh, what I do for the crown prince," after the applause had died down. President Trump on Wednesday, for the first time with the Syrian president, Ahmad al-Shara, they met after announcing that the U.S. would lift the sanctions. This was a huge policy shift. It was quite significant. And President Trump said he told Ahmad al-Shara that he hoped Syria would join the Abraham Accords and would normalize its relations with Israel once the situation in his own country, Syria, is straightened out. To which he said that the Syrian president agreed. Trump yesterday said that he urged Ahmad al-Shara, the president of Syria, to normalize, as I just mentioned. But separately, the Turkish foreign minister said that the foreign ministers of Turkey, the U.S., and Syria would have a meeting today to discuss this pledge for the lifting of sanctions. In Saudi Arabia, the U.S. is no longer demanding that Saudi Arabia normalize with Israel. This used to be a condition for progress on the U.S.-Saudi civil nuclear cooperation talks, but this demand being dropped is a major concession by Washington. And some news outlets were reporting that the U.S. may proceed on the deal with Saudi Arabia and again leave Israel out in the cold, just like what happened with the Houthis. Other announcements this week coming out of Saudi Arabia, it was said that they will invest $600 billion in the U.S., including a nearly $142 billion defense sales deal. And President Trump and the Crown Prince signed a defense deal worth nearly $142 billion, as well as other economic partnership deals. President Trump said that he hopes Saudi Arabia, again, will join the Abraham Accords. Also in the U.S., while Trump was beginning his Middle East travelers earlier this week, analysts were talking about not U.S. foreign policy, but how this Middle East trip is marked by potential private business conflicts between the president, his family organization, and the states that he's visiting. The Trump Organization has entered into real estate deals in 3 of the countries that President Trump was visiting this week. The Washington Post said this, quote, "Government watchdogs, presidential historians, and other critics say it's an escalation of unethical and even unconstitutional conflicts between the interests of the U.S. and the president." Listen, I thought this was quite an interesting story this week. On Monday, the Trump administration said that they plan to accept a luxury Boeing 747-8 plane as a donation from the Qatari royal family, with a view of upgrading the plane to serve as Air Force One and donating it to President Trump's presidential library when he leaves office. But Trump will likely have to waive existing security specifications to use the free luxury jet offered by Qatar, according to current and military and defense security officials who say retrofitting the aircraft to current Air Force One requirements would take years of work and billions of dollars. Shifting gears, a pro-Palestinian Georgetown student from India, whom the Trump administration detained over his pro-Palestinian activism, must be released. A U.S. federal judge ordered this on Wednesday. The Trump administration wants to deport Badar Pansori, a postdoctoral fellow in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown. He was detained in March by immigration authorities, accused of spreading Palestinian militant propaganda and anti-Semitism. And this week, a judge ordered him to be freed. I wanted to give just a couple of updates from the Christian perspective. The conclave of the Roman Catholic Church, cardinals voted to elect Cardinal Robert Prevost, now known as Pope Leo XIV, to lead the Catholic Church. Leo XIV, born in Chicago, is the first North American pontiff and the first pope to hail from the United States. In his first message at the Vatican, the newly elected Pope Leo has appealed for no more war. This was his Sunday message to crowds at St. Petersburg Square, his first upon being elected as the pontiff. The new pope called for authentic and lasting peace, not only in Ukraine, but also a ceasefire in Gaza. And he called for the release of all Israeli hostages. Speaking of Gaza, calling for the resumption of aid, he said, "I am deeply pained by what is happening. Let the fighting cease immediately. Let humanitarian aid be provided to the exhausted civilian population." He's speaking of Gaza. "And may all hostages be released." We stand with His Holiness on that call. Please also mark your calendar. Consider planning a prayer service, a vigil, a prayer walk, an event at your church. Ask your pastor to include prayers or preach about peace in the Middle East, calling for an end to the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, calling for the release of hostages, the release of prisoners that are being held unjustly. Join us for a Solidarity Sunday on June 8th. We hope that this will happen across the country and in other parts of the world. Join our 36 member communions in the U.S. and worldwide. We'll provide resources this month to help shape prayers, worship, liturgy, and other aspects of Solidarity Sunday services and gatherings. You can do this online. Gather together your family from across the country and pray together, or have a Solidarity Sunday and get together with some of your friends and talk about what's happening and ways that you can call and advocate for peace. So we'll provide ecumenical, politically diverse resources that are calling for our asks of a comprehensive permanent ceasefire and all those other things that we talk about. Continue to pray for our managers, for our CMEP staff. There are many things that we have committed to do in the days and weeks and months ahead, and we can't do it without God's strength and without your support. We are so, so grateful for you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. May God go before us. We're grateful to not be alone on the journey toward peace. In the name of Christ, amen.